Welcome to Bunny Trails, a whimsical adventure of idioms and other turns of phrase. I'm Shauna Harrison.
And I'm Dan Pugh. Each week, we take an idiom or other turn of phrase and try to tell the story from its entry into the English language to how it's used today. Have you ever been outside looking up at the night sky and felt like the moon appeared so close, but you know it's actually far, far away? That is the metaphorical concept behind today's phrase. We want to do something that in some ways feels achievable, but in other ways feels so far from possible. But if you shoot for the moon and miss, you'll still be among the stars, floating in a vast openness of space, and unlikely to reach anything else before you die. But that is a literal interpretation of what is clearly meant to be a metaphorical phrase, so we'll mostly stick with the figurative meanings as we discuss shoot for the moon.
Okay.
According to the Merriam-Webster's online dictionary, shoot for the moon, or alternatively, to reach for the moon, means, quote, to try to do or get something that is very difficult to do or get, end quote. Cambridge Online Dictionary has a similar but slightly different definition for shoot to the moon. Quote, to ask for the best or most you could hope for, end quote.
Okay.
So we have two slightly different takes on this, but both agree the phrase is about doing something that is unlikely to happen, but is worth it. Merriam-Webster's feels a little more focused on the negative, while Cambridge feels like it's more focused on the positive. And we're going to see the phrase used both ways throughout history, so it seems both definitions are accurate, at least in the way that we've used them. The origins of this phrase are quite unclear, but we found numerous examples of it being used long before landing on the moon was an achievable task, so it's clear the phrase was meant in a figurative or metaphorical way. The moon represents something unattainable, and there's probably a mix of heavens and stars and other celestial bodies in the origins to these types of phrases, reaching for the stars. That's a variant, which means the same thing, but is more on the more hopeful side, kind of like Cambridge's dictionary definition was. But we're going to kick off looking at a variety of ways this has been used. We're going to begin in 1884. And I am not claiming this is near the origin of the phrase. It's just the first time I could find it in print. We will see some that mention this phrase and its variants as old proverbs. So it's likely they existed in an oral tradition before we started seeing them in the types of things that have been that have survived over the years and been digitized. There's a lot of work, most work, in fact, that would have been printed, didn't survive long enough to be digitized. And even some of the stuff that has survived, there's still a lot of things that just haven't been digitized yet. So this one is the first that I could find it. It is in the Indiana State Sentinel out of Indiana, USA, and it is dated August 8th, 1844. This is a political piece to showcase frustration with the Whigs for not being more effective in opposing the Democrats, who were in power at the time and, in the mind of the author, ruining the state. I'll give a quick warning. The language is angry and uses allusions to physical violence as a metaphor. It also uses some old terms like old coon, which, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, means a shrewd person, especially a politician. There's also an allusion to an old hunting dog with that phrase. And then when they reference Clay, it's speaking of the ground substance while also alluding to Henry Clay, the former U.S. Secretary of State under John Quincy Adams. He was a frequent presidential candidate, and he was one of the founders of the Whig Party. So this whole piece here that was written in as a letter to the editor, but it's written in verse and obviously has a lot of allusions that it's using, and I'm just going to read the first part of it. Quote, when the old coon took sick and was about to expire, the Whigs got a new rifle gun, with which they kept up an incessant fire, but no execution is done. They've been popping and squibbing from that time to this. They boast of their gun and their skill. But with balls made of clay, forever they'll miss, and fail the poor locos to kill. The smoke and the noise create no alarm. They'll not hit a Democrat soon. With such ammunition, they can't do them harm. They might as well shoot at the moon. end quote.
Okay.
Yeah. And it feels like every time we read something political from the United States history, we see something eerily similar happening in present day politics.
Yeah.
It's almost as if the biggest issue in the United States is possibly our inability to learn from our past.
Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a scene in a the America's Funniest Videos,
Uh-huh.
and it featured a gerbil who was trying to jump out of his little casement, and so he would climb up and then jump and then hit the wall and then fall back down and then go back to the spot and jump and then hit the wall and fall back down. And the thing was talking about, hey, gerbils, they're so cute, they do this and they do this, and also they have no cognitive learning abilities. And I'm like, yeah, I feel like maybe that's the US in a broad societal concept. Our technology changes, but for whatever reason, it's the same stuff politically. We just can't figure out how to solve it.
Yep.
This next one is from the Weekly Clarion out of Mississippi, USA, and is dated November 24th, 1870. This is a small part of a larger article, which is detailing Masonic foreign correspondence. In the piece I'm going to read, Grandmaster Gaithright of Mississippi is reviewing a report from Brother Murphy for the year 1870. Quote, "It is a discriminating and able paper, a little impractical occasionally, its author seeming to feel that a man is justified in shooting at the moon, although he may never hope to reach it, rather than to be content with lower aims, even where there are reasonable hopes of success." End quote. I really liked this one because it makes it clear what they mean by shooting at the moon. That this is exactly the way that we're using it now. You're aiming very high. You're going for something that feels unattainable, but there are things that you can reach here and have reasonable hopes of success at, but that we still feel this author still felt like they should be going for higher goals. And I think that conversation of the idea of going after big ideas has always been there's a duality there between, is it better to take smaller steps and to continue to achieve things and have those wins, or is it better to aim big and try and go for something that you might not even be able to attain in your lifetime? All right, this next one is in the Gowler Bunyip out of South Australia, also in Australia. And my apologies to everyone from Australia. I have probably butchered that name.
Probably like you got to say it with some sort of a drawl almost.
There's
or
no
something.
world in which I will be
Gawler.
doing that, but do you want to give it a go?
The Gawler Bunyip,
That wasn't much of a draw. Like, when I
No.
think of a draw, I'm like thinking, Texas, a Gowler Bunyip thing of situation,
Oh, yeah, but you got to, okay, if you try
but
to
you're
do
going
that
to do it in an Australian
and
accent.
give it a British accent at the same time, then you almost have an Australian accent.
All right, go for it. Show us.
Oh, no.
Chicken.
Let's see.
Bark, bark, bark.
I can't do an Australian accent. I need to hear it,
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Think of Steve Irwin.
Gawler Bunyip.
That actually wasn't so bad. That was all right. Steve Irwin saving the day yet again. Thanks.
Yep.
Thanks, Steve Irwin.
Thanks, Steve. Aw.
All right. So this is
Made me sad now.
so this is dated July 17th, 1885, and it's from a section called Mr. Reese's Lecture, who is Mr. Roland Rees, MP, which stands for Member of Parliament. The lecture appears to have been well received, but that paper did have this to say. Quote, "Mr. Rees had placed his standard high, but there was an old proverb, aim at the moon, and you would be sure to hit the steeple." End quote.
Oh.
Well, all right then. Okay, Australia, thanks for that. You'd be sure to hit the steeple. I'm assuming this still means the same thing, but it's definitely right. It's right. I mean, they're using it. It's there. It's an old proverb, they say. Okay.
I mean, sure.
I believe you. I have no reason to not believe you.
I mean, there's the steeple's also kind of in the sky.
Right? Yeah, that's true. That's true. You're going to hit something, but it ain't going to be the moon far, far away. All right. Well, this next one is from The Law Weekly, and this is volume 11. It's dated March of 1915. And this is based in India, though at the time it was under British occupation. Our phrase is in a piece called Intermediate Chatter changing over to the higher branch. It is speaking to lawyers and law students. Quote, think of the able, brilliant men you will have to compete with. You will have heard of the fabulous incomes that barristers who have struck oil have made. But what is the average income of those who do fairly well and are accounted successful? That is what you should think of. It is not what the lucky, talented few make, but what the ordinary, plodding, and fairly brained man can earn. We are all wise to shoot for the moon, but what chance have most of us of hitting it? End quote. Yeah, I like this because it's basically looking at yeah, you can go for these big time things, but you need to have something that's gonna be able to, you need to set your standards at you're gonna be making this much money, and it's fine to shoot for the moon and try to keep getting more and go to that big thing, but most of us don't have a chance of hitting that. So you should also consider what the average income is before you get into this industry.
Yeah, it's that like hope for the best, plan for the worst,
Sure.
or something.
Right. In this case, it's plan for the best.
Something in between, and then
right.
go
This
from
time
there.
it's hope for the best, plan for the average.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what's happening here.
That's a decent kind of idea in life generally, honestly.
Yeah, I think it's probably more relevant than hope for the best and plan for the worst. It's probably like hope for the best, but realistically, it's gonna be average.
Yeah, because like if you're planning ahead for most situations, like you're gonna be all right, if you got some planning going on. So yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, next up are two movies that were set less than 15 years apart, but in different eras. Reaching for the Moon is a 1917 movie of the silent film era with Douglas Fairbanks in the title role. Here's the synopsis. Quote, despite his humble existence as a clerk in a button factory, Alexis Caesar...
You did not just say that.
I did. That's what it is. The other day, my boss came up to me and said, hey, Joe, are you busy?
I was going to be like,
no.
I mean, his name's not Joe, so I don't know who this guy is.
All right. I'm going to do this again
sorry,
now.
Go ahead.
Quote, despite his humble existence as a clerk in a button factory, Alexis Caesar Napoleon Brown can't shake the feeling that he might be royalty. Then one day he is awakened by a visitor, the Prime Minister of Bulgaria, the country that his late mother immigrated from, who informs Alexis that he is their next king. But royal life isn't all it's cracked up to be, thanks in part to assassination attempts by a would-be usurper named Black Boris. End quote. So 1917, here you go.
Okay.
And this is a silent film featuring Douglas Fairbanks, who was about to have the breakout decade of his life.
I guess if you have a name like that in 1917, then yeah, you might think that you're royalty, right?
Alexis Caesar Napoleon Brown?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the point, but yeah.
Right. And you work in a button factory. Clearly that's a cover.
Clearly,
I mean,
yes.
Like...
Well, the full movie is actually public domain now, so we're going to link to it in our show notes, which are available on our website, bunnytrailspod.com. And then in 1930, we saw the release of another film called Reaching for the Moon. This was directed by Edmund Golding, in which a Wall Street banker chases a flirtatious girl while being coached by his valet, because the banker presumably doesn't know anything about dating or that kind of stuff, or wooing a woman, I suppose. So they all end up on an ocean liner cruise where love potions are mixed in the cocktails and hilarity ensues, probably. So the odd thing is the lead character in this one is played by none other than Douglas Fairbanks.
Oh, okay.
Fairbanks was in many adventure movies, including playing the original Zorro in 1920, taking on Robin Hood in 1922, and D'Artagnan in 1921's The Three Musketeers. So he has a whole mix of 1920s adventure-style movies, but this guy was hitting the peak of his career as the silent films ended. We're going to actually look more at Douglas Fairbanks in our behind-the-scenes video, which airs on Fridays on our Patreon. That's patreon.com/bunnytrailspod. But for the 1930 Reaching for the Moon, it's a different movie altogether. And here's a note on the film from the Museum of Modern Art. Quote, Hollywood had flooded the market with musicals, and in a typical snapback, the studios now decided that nobody wanted them. Virtually all of Irving Berlin's songs were cut from Reaching for the Moon, save the one given to a newcomer named Bing Crosby. The song stripped Reaching for the Moon remains an appealing proto-screwball set on an eye-popping Art Deco ocean liner. End quote.
What?
Yeah, so Museum of Modern Art here talking about one, a very young and new, and I believe maybe the first feature film that Bing Crosby was in that got released. There, it sounds like there were some others, but they weren't necessarily released by Hollywood. But yeah, so this was one of his first, and that's the only Irving Berlin song that survived, and him singing that song. We'll link to it on the show notes as well, and you can go watch that. Yeah, so it's interesting, and it sounds like so it's proto screwball. They said, so a screwball comedy would just be like zany and wild things happening that just in an ever increasing series of events that just
Kind of
seem
the
implausible.
comedy of errors, but to the
Yeah.
extreme or whatever.
Yeah, but definitely things that would not, you just like, you're going into it knowing that, okay, this would not really happen. This is not how that would happen.
Right.
And I think the proto part here is because screwball comedies really took off later, in many decades later. But I think the love potions being mixed into cocktails really, really made part of that happen. And it's certainly just that one song that Bing Crosby is a part of. He's not the only singer in that, but yeah, it was quite the interesting song. Well, the phrase took a huge spike in usage in the late 1950s and throughout the 1960s with the Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 and President Kennedy announcing in 1961 that the national goal of the United States was to put a man on the moon and bring him safely back to Earth by the end of the decade. Suddenly, this old saying, meaning something nearly impossible, was in the public's consciousness as something that might actually get done in their lifetime. So here are 3 quick headlines from that era, 57 to 69. This one's out of the Salina Journal in Kansas, USA, dated June 10th, 1958. Quote, Air Force to shoot for the moon in August to fire 3 lunar probes, end quote. Here's one from the Daily News Record out of Virginia, USA, dated January 19th, 1962. Quote, U.S. to shoot for the moon. The United States plans literally and figuratively to shoot for the moon next week in what could be its proudest period of the young space age, end quote. Or the combination of this monumental effort of putting a man on the moon and safely bringing him back, as President Kennedy had said, is being reduced to this used car sales ad from the Belleville Motor Car Incorporated. It was out of the Athens Messenger, Ohio, USA, from July 18th, 1969, just 2 days after the historic moonshot and before the NASA astronauts have even returned to Earth. Quote, We've shot the moon. Belleville Autonauts are back from their own trip to the moon, and they've brought back a new lunar price schedule that really is out of this world when it comes to saving your money. Come in today and save on these moonshot deals. End quote.
Okay.
It does not get much more American than that.
Wow. No, it does not.
I love it. Oh, man. That's
very fun.
That's it right there. That is the, yes. All right. Well, with that, it's time to move to our more modern uses. But first, we need to say thank you to our sponsors.
This episode is sponsored by our amazing patrons on Patreon. And the cool thing about Patreon is it is 100% free to join the community. We have new things every weekday on the feeds. On Mondays, we have a conversation about what movies, shows, books, podcasts, and whatever else everyone is enjoying. Tuesdays see early access to the week's podcast. Wednesdays have all the links, books, songs, and other content mentioned in the week's episode. Thursday has patrons-only polls, and Fridays are our lightly edited behind-the-scenes video featuring all the cut content, goofs, and bonus facts you could imagine.
We've got some other pretty cool stuff too, like original digital artwork once a month made by Shauna, and direct access to talk with us. No algorithms getting in the way of what we see or don't see. Plus, you can get awesome name recognition like Pat Rowe does every episode. And our top spot is currently occupied by the amazing Mary Halsig Lopez. You can join the Bunny Trails community for free at Bunny Trails Pod on Patreon.
That's patreon.com/bunnytrailspod.
We're going to kick off our modern uses with a 1975 song called Reach for the Moon by singer and songwriter Angela Bond. It was released as a single and then later as part of the album Bondage. It starts off with the chorus, quote, "Reach for the moon, you may land among the stars, but you're gonna make it, I know that you are," end quote. The song goes through as this is a thing that his mom said to him growing up in, rough situations. But reach for the moon, you may land among the stars. We're going to come back to that, by the way. That's that 1975 song there. All right. Next up is Shoot the Moon, which is a 1982 movie directed by Alan Parker. It stars Albert Finney and Diane Keaton. Here's the synopsis from the trailer description. Quote, "A 15-year marriage dissolves, leaving both the husband and wife and their 4 children devastated. He's preoccupied with a career and a mistress, she with a career in caring for 4 young children. While they attempt to go their separate ways, jealousy and bitterness reconnect them." End quote. The movie was widely seen as one of the first films about American divorce from a real and honest perspective. So it's a gut-wrenching drama that it showcases what wouldn't be a fantasized version of this, but a real and raw and emotional version of what this looks like.
Okay.
And the reactions, when, he's got a mistress, when she takes on a new lover after they've broken up, and how all of these different things play out. So, yeah, it's if you are a film buff, I think that, or if you just really like these kind of raw, gritty, emotional movies, then this one may be something that's right up your alley. Next up is a common myth the internet continues to tell us, and this is where we're going to come back to that song that I just mentioned. And this is about the popular saying, "Shoot for the moon. Even if you miss it, you'll land among the stars." This saying is often attributed to Norman Vincent Peale. However, he did not lay claim to it. In fact, he attributed it to another person. So this is an excerpt from Peale's 1986 book, Why Some Positive Thinkers Get Powerful Results. Chapter 5, titled "You Can Make Things Go Better," starts off with the sentence, quote, "Shoot for the moon. Even if you miss it, you'll land among the stars." So said Les Brown, a former member of a state legislature, but now a popular youth motivational speaker, end quote.
Okay.
So internet articles are frequently attributing this to Peale, and some even attribute Peale as the creator of Shoot for the Moon as a whole. But we know that the concept of Shoot for the Moon's been around before Peale was born, and Peale himself credits Les Brown with the extended phrase, "Shoot for the moon, even if you miss, you'll land among the stars." So Peale wasn't even claiming to have said that, although the internet pretty much is just a circular logic train. It quotes itself over and over and over again. It took me 2 hours to figure out why people say Norman Vincent Peale even says this.
Oh, no.
Because it took me 2 hours to figure out where he put it in print somewhere or had said it in a speech or whatever. And so when I finally found that, then I'm like, it says right here that he says that's Les Brown saying.
Like it says it in the
Yeah, it's
material.
right here. When he uses the quote, he gives it to Les Brown. Oh, my goodness. So internet, do better.
Yeah.
This is the problem. We have access to, most of the information in the whole world. But if you're just going to do it wrong, then it's not helpful. It's actually more harmful.
Right.
Anyway, so, but I think even more importantly, so this is Les Brown is being cited as this by Norman Vincent Peale in 1986. But I don't know what kind of music Les Brown was into, but it's likely that he may have been influenced by this important song that we just talked about, 1975, "Reach for the Moon" by Angelo Bond, because his opening lyrics of the chorus were, "Reach for the moon, you may land among the stars." So I feel like even Les Brown didn't really, he didn't coin this phrase. Angelo Bond and whoever else, Angelo Bond was one of the writers on this song. He was a famous songwriter, but So he's the one that may have come up with this, or maybe it was his mother that said this. I don't know.
That's so
Or maybe he'd
fascinating.
been around even before that. But I can say this for certain. Norman Vincent Peale
It
didn't
wasn't.
even claim to
Oh,
say that.
yeah.
Didn't even claim to coin that. He used the phrase because he liked it so much, but he didn't claim to coin it.
Yeah.
So I have no doubt that Brown's phrase and Peale's citations of it helped propel the concept of shoot for the moon to new heights, so to speak. Google's Ngram shows an uptick for the phrase in the 1980s with a steady rise since the quote started hitting high school yearbooks in the 1990s. And I found tons of examples of that. I'll spare you. But yeah, there were
Okay.
tons of examples of the little pithy quotes, that show up at the bottom of in a yearbook. It's got their picture, and then here's their senior
Yeah,
quote,
yeah.
and tons of them were shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you land among the stars. So, which I did mock in my opening piece. So, all right. Well, now that that's settled, Shoot for the Moon is a 1997 artwork by Parks Reese. It is a lithograph and features a fish jumping out of the water, seemingly trying to grab the moon in its mouth. I like the image. It's simple. Obviously, it's a lithograph. There's only so much you can do with that, but it's a simple image. But I really love the way it looks like the way the fish's eye is looking up. It looks like he is trying to grab the moon. He's jumping out of the
Trying to
water
catch it.
to grab food. And obviously, if you looked at it from the fish's perspective, then he would not even see the moon, right? So there's no way that he's doing that. But when you look at it from the artist's rendering, that's what it looks like, and that's the
Yeah.
imagery it evokes. Shoot the Moon is a beautiful song by Norah Jones off her 2002 album Come Away With Me, which is an amazing album. I bought it on CD when it first came out, and I still love her music. Quote, "The summer days are gone too soon. You shoot the moon and miss completely. And now you've left to face the gloom, the empty room that once smelled sweetly." End quote. Reaching for the Moon, the autobiography of NASA mathematician Katherine Jones. The biography part means that it's a story of a person's life or part of their life, and the auto part of it means that it is written by the person in question. So this autobiography of Katherine Johnson was written by Katherine Johnson. It was released in 2019, and the title, Reaching for the Moon, plays off the actual goal of trying to land someone on the moon, the figurative usage, trying to do something incredibly difficult as well. Here's the synopsis from the publisher, quote, "The inspiring autobiography of NASA mathematician Katherine Johnson, who helped launch Apollo 11. As a young girl, Katherine Johnson showed an exceptional aptitude for math. In school, she quickly skipped ahead several grades and was soon studying complex equations with the support of a professor who saw great promise in her. But ability and opportunity did not always go hand in hand. As an African American and a girl growing up in an era of brutal racism and sexism, Katherine faced daily challenges. Still, she lived her life with her father's words in mind. You are no better than anyone else, and nobody else is better than you." In the early 1950s, Katherine was thrilled to join the organization that would become NASA. She worked on many of NASA's biggest projects, including the Apollo 11 mission that landed the first men on the moon. Katherine Johnson's story was made famous in the best-selling book and Oscar-nominated film Hidden Figures. And now, in Reaching for the Moon, she tells her own story for the first time in a lively autobiography that will inspire young readers everywhere. End quote.
Awesome.
That is great. I am adding that to my to be read list because she is an amazing example of a person who overcame so much adversity to do the thing that she wanted to do. And because she was seeking what she wanted, something that was advanced mathematics, right? Because she was seeking the things she wanted and didn't let all of these other things stop her from reaching that, then she got to literally reach for the moon,
Yeah.
and not just figuratively, and that's amazing.
Yeah, it really is.
Shooting the moon is a strategy in some card games like Hearts, where you attempt to pick up all of the tricks. Here is a brief overview from a 2024 article by Neil Taparia on Hearts.co. Quote, "Shooting the moon in Hearts is a high-risk, high-reward strategy. The goal is to collect all 13 hearts and the Queen of Spades. The player who manages to shoot the moon will get 0 points, and all others take 26. However, if a player fails to collect all the hearts and the queen of spades, they will be forced to take all of the points in their hand. When playing the classic card game Hearts, shooting the moon can completely alter the game's dynamic. Putting all other players far ahead in points awards a massive advantage to the person who shot the moon. End quote. And in case you were not familiar with the card game Hearts, having the lowest amount of points is the best. So whoever has the lowest amount of points will win when you hit the game's end point. And there are other card games where this could happen too. Pinochle has some varieties where you would shoot the moon, and Bridge has a piece on that. I don't know much about Bridge, so I that was something I learned while looking up shooting the moon in cards. And I'll link to a worldbridge.org, part of their championship stuff, where they talk about someone who shoots the moon in that.
Cool.
Well, I was quite the skeptic growing up, and as I've gotten older, I've really started to appreciate phrases that have a positive spin. Shoot for the moon, reach for the stars, and other phrases like it are ways that we can identify our desire to try new things even when they are difficult. And I think that is what helps us grow as humans, which is a requirement to keep from feeling stuck in life. That's about all the time we have for today. If you have any thoughts on the show or pop culture references we should have included, reach out to us on Patreon, patreon.com/bunnytrailspod, or comment on our website, bunnytrailspod.com.
It is poll time. Recently, we asked our patrons hardcover or paperback. Hardcover wins the day, with digital options coming in second. Heather notes, quote, I'm not picky about format types. A book is a book, however it's packaged. These days, I mostly read ebooks or library books because of price and space. I will read audiobooks, but usually only nonfiction. Fiction narration to me is a mixed bag, end quote. Cheryl says, quote, I love hardbacks, but I'm out of shelf space, so I'm mostly reading ebooks and audiobooks these days, end quote. And Mary adds, quote, I absolutely love hardback books. The feel, the art inside, and on the cover appeals to my love of visual art. When I'm traveling, I always go to the airport bookstore and buy a paperback as a treat to myself. The truth, I get most of my literature and audiobooks in the car as I go from appointment to appointment, end quote.
Yeah, that's fair. We also asked our patrons about their most prized book. Pat said, quote, most prized? I have a hardcover set of Lord of the Rings from 1973, perhaps earlier in the 70s. There are too many to mention. I love my books. However, a close second is the Dark Tower series in softcover, the box set, and the third, The Chronicles of Narnia, the box set, end quote.
Well, Emily added, quote, I have a hardcover book from my favorite author, Maeve Binchy, that I randomly found in a discount bin in a small local shop. It turned out to be the first of a series of related novels, character overlaps, and one of my favorites of her writings, end quote. Jan said, quote, it's a hardcover 1949 copy of The History and Social Influence of the Potato. Too many old cookbooks to mention come in at a close second, end quote. I love that so much.
Jan always has the best answers.
I know.
Sometimes I just save him for last intentionally because I'm like, dude, the history and social influence of the potato. What a great answer.
Yep, it's fantastic. As a reminder, our silly pools mean absolutely nothing and are not scientifically valid. Patrons of all levels, including our free tiers, can take part. Head over to patreon.com/bunnytrailspod to take this week's poll. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week. Until then, remember,
words belong to their users.